Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. AmericanHort's Impact Washington Fly-In Summit of the nation's capital, which takes place in mid-September, gives growers and other members of the floriculture industry a chance to connect with policymakers and advocate for their businesses and for the industry. In this episode, I talked to Matt Mika, Vice President of Advocacy and Government Affairs at AmericanHort, about what Impact Washington attendees can expect, the important issues they'll be discussing on Capitol Hill, and why telling your story is critical in helping to educate lawmakers about the present and future of horticulture. Here's our conversation. So we are coming right out of Cultivate 2025, which was a great event that took place in Columbus this year. And I know the American Hort team is always busy, never seems to slow down. And with that, coming right on the heels of Cultivate, we've got Impact Washington here coming up in just a couple of months. So, Matt, I just want to get your take on, really what attendees of this year's event can expect as they come to DC. What are some of the important topics that your team is going to be addressing, and how it's going to work this year?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. We talk about this at Cultivate, and everyone who's involved in this industry always sees that they bring up labor, and labor. So we're going to spend a lot of time on labor, specifically H2A and H2B. Talk about Farm Bill. There's some new renovation there. People are kind of moving some stuff. We've heard GT Thompson wants to move that. And then just everything related around research and development, USDA, making sure programs and all the money is there through appropriations. So those are going to kind of be the big three. We mentioned this at Cultivate and also through some of our Impact Washington, biweekly and Capwire every week that goes out to our premium members. And the reconciliation package, a lot of the tax issues that we've been working on through the years and those tax cuts that were part of the 2017 tax plan were included in that. Some of those were increased, as time has gone on, the cost of business has gone up. So in the past, we've had a lot of stuff related to tax. So, and then another one would probably be tariffs. What we're seeing here, the uncertainty, the back and forth, and how trade affects. The biggest thing for folks is kind of three-pronged. One, you get to come out to DC, you get to meet your elected officials, and more importantly, the staff that are making those decisions and working with them. Two, you get to meet with other people for the industry. If it's a nursery grower, greenhouse grower, or an allied member, a supplier, or landscaper, or an independent garden center, or somebody from Oregon and you're from New York, like you just get to meet people across the industry that you may not meet. And then lastly, we're going to have folks from USDA, Department of Labor, members of Congress, senators, and then also industry experts coming to speak. So over a 3-day period, we're trying to pack in as much, understand, how hard it is, as to get around DC. And hopefully it's not 100 degrees like it is right now, and it's a nice cool 80. But yeah, we're getting everyone together from meeting to meeting their elected official staff, and then just having important people from our members of Congress and the departments we work with come speak to our to the fly-in.
Okay. Well, I know, and I've done some of these events myself, and to your point, it's inevitable. You're going to get down to DC. DC is a swamp sometimes, so you can get those 100-degree days even in the middle of September. So, my own personal advice is bring some water, bring some walking shoes, and other than that, you're good to go.
Yeah. Comfortable shoes, make sure you have a couple of changes of clothes, extra shirts, you're all good. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I know that, I'm sure that there's a lot of folks who have attended this event many times in the past. I'm sure you're also going to have some first timers there. So for those who, maybe have had the chance to host decision makers and lawmakers on their farms and in their greenhouses, which we can talk about the importance of that here in a second. But for those who are doing this event for the first time, what advice can you give them when it comes to, walking through the halls of Congress and having these types of conversations?
Yeah, we go through the people that are attending. One of the questions we ask is, one, have you ever been to DC before? So we do have a handful of people that have never been to the nation's capital. So there's that perspective. And then there's the folks that have never come to DC and actually sat down with their elected official as either member of Congress, senators, or departments. The biggest thing and the easiest thing, and this is what we try to do, don't get into the weeds. We're going to have one-pagers and documents, but you got to come up with that 30-second or that 1 minute. You got to tell your story. Like, where are you? Why are you in the industry? What's going on? What's going on back home? I can tell you, as a former staffer who was on the Hill for over 10 years, the last thing you want is someone reading a piece of paper tell your story like, hey, if you care about X, if you care about labor, talk about that. If you care about the tariffs that are coming, talk about that. If you care about a issue that is specific to your business that no one knows about, bring that up. But you got to figure out that elevator speech of like 30 seconds to a minute, because as you know, Brian, a lot of these meetings are 15 to 20 minutes. You only got a short amount of time. And if you're meeting with a staffer, they probably have 10 to 15 meetings in the day.
Yeah.
Like you might have a Department of Defense meeting and then one with us, and then the next meeting's on Social Security, and then they're meeting on another issue. So you got to get into it, talk about it. And then what we talked about at Cultivate, and I remind people, less than 2% of the American public is involved in agriculture. Even less are in the greenhouse and grower and horticulture industry. So if you're not telling your story, somebody else is.
Yeah. Well, and somebody who used to actually live in the DC area right out of college, I was always amazed the fact that you go on Capitol Hill and you might have a chance to meet, directly with your representative or your senator. A lot of times you're going to be meeting with some of their high level staff. I mean, and those are the folks, I mean, they work just as closely with, with the representatives on drafting legislation, making key decisions, putting together planning and all that. So, I mean, those conversations, whoever you're talking to is going to be valuable, I think.
Yeah, one thing emphasis, and this for being up here, you want to get that email or that direct line or that cell phone to that staffer, because that representative or senator or someone at USDA or DL is going to be like, hey, I got a question. I remember I had a meeting. Let me ask my staffer. And if they remember, and you brought it up, and your question was, what else should people be doing? Well, they're going into the August recess. Congress goes back to their district and does their work period, House and Senate. The House is out right now. The Senate is in right now. They might be in for a couple more days. But now is the time to invite your member of Congress, your senator, your staffer, your governor, your state rep, your local community person, if it's a township or supervisor, your city council. Have them come out to your facility, walk them around. That time in your facility for 30 minutes to an hour and a half is so valuable, because, oh, wait, now you come out to DC and they've been to your facility. They know who you are. You're like, hey, remember back in August or a year ago, you were in our facility? They remember that. I can tell you recently, we had a greenhouse grower out there here this spring, and they remembered 2 years ago when they toured the facility. So elected officials and staff, yes, they do write it down, but they actually remember, hey, you showed me that there was this issue you're dealing with, and this happened. So those little things of 15 to 20 minutes back home in the district, getting them there, and then seeing them in DC, they put the two together. And then when a big issue comes up, they're like, hey, I need to reach out to that person that was just here a month or two ago.
Yeah. Well, and to your point too, I mean, timing is perfect here because a lot of those folks are on recess right now. So they're back home in their district. So, these are the times they have these types of conversations. And I think too, looking back, when I was in the room for your portion of the state of the industry presentation at Cultivate, you talked about the fact that there's a lot of new members of this Congress. So, educating them right along the way has got to be important to having them learn firsthand about how this industry operates.
Yeah, I think there's 72 members of the House and Senate that are new. Let me give you another number. So we haven't reauthorized the Farm Bill since 2018. It was supposed to be done in 2023. It got extended. Over 51% of the House and Senate has not voted on a Farm Bill. So that right there, you got 435 members in the House and 100 senators. You add that together, 535, 51% have not voted on a Farm Bill. That means they are new as of 2019.
Yes.
A real great education opportunity there.
As we talk to growers in this industry, and a lot of times, they might say when it comes to some of these high level topics, their response might be, well, I'm focusing more on the things that I think I can control in my business. These are things I don't necessarily have much control. What types of messaging do you have to those folks on, I mean, there really are things that your voice matters in a lot of these conversations.
One is tariffs, and we have a great example of this. Everyone in the industry, every grower uses peat moss. 96% of peat moss, I think, comes from Canada or outside the US. So if we're not growing it here, it's just something we don't do. And a lot of that has to do with environmental regulations.
Yeah.
But with all the potential tariffs coming up, we work because we heard from growers. We heard from folks, hey, this is a problem. We went to USDA, we went to USTR, we went to the committees of jurisdiction, the House and Senate Ag committees, and we've got peat moss exempt throughout the world. So Canada, the EU, and the world. That was something that we probably would have never thought of, but some folks got engaged. So it's one of those things of like, hey, this may not affect me, but it does. And the more we hear about it, also one thing we worked on and made sure of this was working with USDA and USTR, that's the trade representative.
Yeah.
Everything that is considered an agriculture commodity, so everything that is a plant under the definition of the US, the USDA's agriculture commodity, that is in the USMCA, so that is a trade agreement between Canada and Mexico and the US, is also exempt.
Mm.
Now the 10% tariffs and others, and we know it keeps changing. The August 1st deadline's coming. And, as we know with the Trump administration, every hour everything changes and, oh, wait, we're back to where we were, but no, we're not. So I know there's a lot of uncertainty and pause and like, how do we deal with this? But the more we hear from our members and growers and just the horticulture industry working across the board, what's affecting folks, that's
Yeah.
high level. We could have those conversations like, oh, there's this little niche thing that we need to chat about. So we're having those conversations. There are some good wins. I know the uncertainty is hard, but we're all, as I mentioned, only 6 months into this administration of a 4-year term. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and especially, we talk about something like tariff policies. As growers in this industry are starting to, plan for next year and set set their other financial budgets, that's got to be a challenge because you said there's so many moving pieces to this where things could change by the day, sometimes even by the hour. Just so that's got to make it a challenge, not just for your team, but for everyone in this industry to try and take those long term perspectives, knowing that things might be changing so quickly.
Yeah, those are the conversations we've had with the White House and elected officials, especially in the House and Senate, and then the committees of jurisdiction and USDA of the uncertainty and not knowing is what makes it difficult. And
Yeah.
try to explain how our industry works. People are buying stuff now for next year. They start growing, planting. We all know how important, Mother's Day is. If you're out in Arizona or New Mexico, their big season's coming up here in the fall. So, depending what part of the country you're in, you got different things going on. And our folks just want to know. So, hey, if there's a 10% tariff, great, let's do it. I can budget for that.
Yep.
But today I have one, tomorrow I don't. September 1st, it may be different. Oh, and then January 1, 2026, something different's going to happen. That's what gives people the uncertainty, the pause, the concern. I can figure out money back and forth. We can figure out, where the cost is going to go. We also know what people are going to pay for plants,
Yeah.
what they're going to pay in the industry. So there becomes a cost question of, do I do this or do I not? So that's what we're hearing from our members. That's kind of what we heard at Cultivate. And I know that's what people are hearing going in or thinking about going into the fall is how do you figure this out? And that's one of my biggest thing about trade and tariffs of this administration is the uncertainty is going to
Mm.
give, especially our folks who are all mom and pops, they're small businesses. I got to figure out how to make this work.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about that uncertainty, and I think it also extends to what's happening with the labor and immigration sector of the industry today. So there's looking at H-2A and wage rates and how you can address those. There's also enforcement issues and your growers who rely on seasonal labor. How they, I guess, work with their teams to make sure that we're all in a good place, and you just don't always pay attention to what you're seeing, in the headlines. We've all got an important role in this industry. How does American Hort kind of work into some of those discussions?
Yeah, we saw early on because we knew this was going to come with the Trump administration 2.0. So we started prepping documents and webinars on making sure people, if you're using H2A or H2B or a visa program, make sure your I-9s are done correctly, dot the I's, cross the T's, do an internal audit, get that all ready. We've also worked for our members of getting out a lot of documents in Spanish because we know a lot of our employees are Spanish is their first language. So we want to make sure they have stuff. Know your rights, what you can and can't do.
Mm.
The disheartening part has been you hear something on a Friday or a Thursday for Secretary Rollins and the president says something, and then come Monday, they change their tune or, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. I think we talked about this before. I was in a group meeting with a large coalition. We were at USDA meeting with some high level officials, and we were talking labor and H2A and how it works. And all of a sudden, everyone's phone is blowing up because the president in his cabinet meeting is like, "Hey, I want to help out farmers and hotels." Well, farmers is a lot of H2A, and hotels is H2Bs. And we were literally at USDA, and we're looking at the staff. They're like, "Did you have an idea?" They're like, "No, they had no idea." So that kind of communication between the departments is something we're really working on of like, hey, have you talked to DOL and DHS and, USDA. And we're seeing that more now that the secretaries are in place and their staff are in place and they're actually talking. You've got Secretary DeRemer, who is a former congresswoman and small business owner from Oregon. She's the Secretary of Labor. You've got Secretary Rollins, who's from Texas, who grew up on a farm, had a cattle farm, involved at USDA. And then you got Secretary Noem, who was a governor in South Dakota, understands ag. These three secretaries, all three women, are talking weekly about what's going on in ag. And the reason I bring up the women part, because this is the first time ever that all three departments have three women secretaries. And guess what? They're actually talking. So this is a good thing. A lot of people are talking about this, that unfortunately it took getting three women in there to figure out how to help out ag labor. So we're really working on this. They have great staff. They're working. But what happens is we see, as I mentioned, on a Friday announcement from DHS or the president, and then on Monday, it's like, oh, it's not what we meant. We got to change it a little bit. So our biggest hope is, I think we talked about this before. G.T. Thompson had 6 members of the House, Republican 6 members and 6 Democrat members, so 12 total. Last Congress had a working group, and they got together and came up with 12 pillars around ag labor. What do we need to see? Some of that is around the AWARE, the H-2A program, the processing, the documentation, for folks that use H-2A. At DOL, it's online. To DHS, you have to fill it out. Well, that doesn't make sense. It should be a one-stop shop. So they are currently drafting a bill moving forward. They've got those folks. You've got G.T. Thompson, and then you get Angie Craig, who's the lead Democrat from Minnesota. They're putting that together. Unfortunately, with reconciliation and some of the other things that have come up here in the last 6 months, they haven't been able to move forward.
Yeah.
There's a real opportunity here to get that. The problem is the House Ag Committee and Senate Ag Committee, who's also looked at this, doesn't have jurisdiction. It's got to go to the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee is chaired by a gentleman named Jim Jordan from Ohio. We have a lot of members in Ohio. They meet with him. Well, we met with him. What they need to hear is what the industry needs, what we're doing. And this is a great opportunity here in August and also at the Impact Washington fly-in of talking about what the industry needs, how it can fix, where we move forward, and then working with the administration on what they need, because there's a lot of things that are happening at USDA and DOL and DHS. They are changing the HJ rules. They're working on the farm worker rule. The problem is the next secretary, the next administration comes in and can change it back to where it was or 180 it or snip it. We have to get a permanent fix here. We haven't seen a fix to ag labor and workforce since 1986, since IRCA. That's 40 years.
I was just going to say, I know you brought that up in your State of the Industry talk. Yeah.
So, yeah, we need statutory fix. So, and we need, bipartisan board, House and Senate to get that. And I think we have a framework there with just, what's going to be the magic, sauce that gets through and gets everything done. And how do we get, as I said, 218 in the House and 60 votes in the Senate to get something across the line that the president and the White House would sign.
Yeah, well, and I think to your point too, an event like Impact Washington helps that because it keeps it high on everybody's radar. I mean, every year I've been reporting on this industry or different parts of this industry for 20 plus years now, and obviously labor's always been the biggest topic, but it gets referred to all the time as the hot potato issue, where it's like you get to the campaign season, all of a sudden nobody wants to talk about it, so it comes up and then it gets put on the back burner. But I think that an event like Impact Washington can really help keep that on the radar for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be vital. I mean, as we talk about, it's the number one issue, and just explaining how it works. The simple things of what's the cost, how hard it is, how long it takes to fill out the paperwork, or I have a simple question about this one visa, but I can't get a hold of someone. Like, how do we fix that? And those are the small business questions that people need answered, that the government should be able to answer, or somebody should be able to answer. It shouldn't take 2 weeks or a month, or I haven't heard anything back on my application. It's been 6 months. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I don't want to leave the conversation without kind of getting into your own background a little bit. I know you've been with American Hort for what's probably been 4 or 5 years now, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. Time is a bubble, right? I think. But I know, that you've had a lot of previous experience working on the Hill, working through some of these issues. How did you kind of bring that past experience into what you're doing today, both with American Hort and then on behalf of the industry that it represents?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my third cultivate. second year with American Hort. I literally started the week before Cultivate 2023. So got thrown into the mix and it was great. Loved it and wouldn't miss it for the world.
Yeah.
So for folks that don't know, before I came to American Hort, I worked with Tyson Foods for 12 years. I worked for a small multi-client, mainly in the commerce supply chain. And then previous to that, about 10 years on Capitol Hill, working for three members of Congress, all from Michigan. And I spent 5 years in the state legislature. So I've seen from all perspectives, state and federal, and specifically in ag. And I didn't grow up on a farm. I have no agriculture background, but my first job as a driver, as an intern for the lieutenant governor of Michigan, I got taken to his farm, put to work, and he fell in love with it, and then have been working on ag policy and just whole way through. And basically, since I got to DC in 2004, labor has been just an issue. It's constantly come up, as you mentioned, word.
Yeah.
But really what works and what does it is just knowing when you're going into a meeting, when you're go to USDA, like one, who you meeting with, get to know their background. One thing I like to do, and we'll talk to our folks that are coming to the fly-in, a senator or representative is going to understand. They're going to understand ag. They may not know the greenhouse industry. They may not know horticulture or just the green industry a whole. So you want to get into that. But the staffer, one of the first things we ask is, hey, what do you know about ag? Have you ever been to a farm? Do you have any background? Once you set that basis, you can change your conversation. If they're like, yeah, I went to a land grant, I went to, um, Texas A&M or Texas Tech or Michigan State or Purdue, or I went to an ag school in California. Great.
Yeah.
They have a background. If they're like, hey, all I know is I buy my food at Walmart or Meijer or, at the 7-Eleven or the Wesco down the street, like, and be like, what? So you gotta change your conversation.
Yeah.
And then from that, that's, kind of where you go. And then more importantly, when you're meeting with committee staff or we're going to USDA or DOL or a specific department, we can get much more in the weeds on an issue. We can be like, hey, if we're talking about labor, let's talk about this H-2A rule on this specific issue and how it affects, drivers, or what happens with the AWAR related to this H-2A issue. Or we're talking with the House Ag Committee, we can talk about Section 7721, which is pest and plant disease, to make sure the money is there in a program. Or if we're going to EPA, we can talk about endangered species or a droplet issue related to water.
Right.
So depending on who you're meeting with their background, that the first question you got to ask is, hey, what do you know about this? And then, from there, you kind of move forward. My biggest thing is, working at the state and federal level, just knowing what worked for me and others and what the member of Congress, or if it was a governor or state rep, needed to see. We can tape that, especially with the fly-in or when we're sending letters or when we're communicating out to American Hort members, when we do our voter voice, hey, we need you to do this. And you simplify it. It's like A, B, and C. But if you want more, reach out, because that's what they have. And in today's world with instant gratification and cell phones and iPhones, everyone's looking for that next thing. So how do you grab their attention? What is that I got you moment? Or how do you do it? What's that quick fact?
Yeah.
We're an industry that represents $17 billion. If you throw in the supply chain, it's 350 billion. Those are quick numbers that people are like, whoa, didn't realize that.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine too, and I know, American Hort's done a great job of this over the years, not just having your team talk about issues like this, but, having growers who've been in who have been in this market for a while, who have hosted people on their farms, then talk to other growers. This is why this is how I did it. This is how I overcame some of my initial concerns about, or my comfort levels, and how this turned out to be positive for us. So I would imagine that that's something that you guys really focus on as well.
Yeah, I mean, talking to your neighbor across the street or someone at church or your business, or, you're at your kid's baseball game or softball or soccer or lacrosse or whatever. It's like, hey, I work in this and we just had an elected official. And hey, did you know this? So telling them that, and then just explaining kind of the community, that goes so far in getting people engaged and how to better understand the industry and what they're doing. And, a lot of people know, like, hey, they drive past the facility or the greenhouse, or they see the name, or they, see the acreage or whatever it may be, but they actually don't know what happens in there unless they've been in it. So, not only inviting your elected officials, invite your neighbor, like, hey, come and check our facility out. Let me show you what we got going. Or, hey, I heard you needed a plant. Why don't you come on by? It's amazing to get people engaged that think they know, but then when they come and see it, they are just amazed. I mean, I've taken a lot of staff on tours. I was just up in Michigan at a couple facilities, and they walked in and they didn't realize just how mammoth it was and just how many people were engaged. And it's just like, well, I just go, the local market or Meyer, or if it's Walmart, and buy my plants. And I was like, yeah, this is where it all starts.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine those conversations too, not help not just the lawmaker, but also, we have these misconceptions that, everybody in DC is, they're always fighting with each other. They're not working for me. They're working for themselves. And I think having those types of conversations can help clear up some of those misconceptions as well.
Yeah. I've kind of used these numbers over the years, just in general. There's about, and these are Matt Mika numbers. There's no like, but you know, a good percentage, say 40% of elected officials come up to DC, and I'll say the state level too, because they believe in Republican or Democratic ideals or whatever party they're a part of.
Yeah.
Another 40% come up because they want to work on agriculture issues, or they're a small business owner, or they care about veterans or tax or defense. Name your issue.
Right.
There's another 10% that come up, and this is what gets to your point. These are the problem child. They come up because they're looking for the next job. They want to be on CNN or Fox News. Those are the people you hear about all the times: the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Bo Bears, the Chip Roys, the AOCs, the ones that are up there that are on TV, and you're like, what are you actually working on?
Yep.
Then there's another 10% that just come up for different reasons. We won't get into that, but like, really, there's about 80% of the elected officials that are there for the right reasons. And you just got to figure out what that niche is and explain it to them and be like, hey, this affects your congressional district or your state. And this is why it's so important. And then they really get engaged. And I'm telling you, when they come see a great house or they come see a facility, they come out, they're like, wow, I never knew that. And then they want to come back. And then especially some are like, I need to bring my kids. I need to bring my wife. Like, hey, we'll be back here this summer. Or, hey, we come out here and buy our Christmas decorations or our Christmas tree. So it's just, it's a whole other thing because they don't always coordinate when they're back home, as we mentioned earlier, and then back in DC. But when you can see them in both spots, it's like, oh, the light bulb goes on.
Sure, sure. So, and as we start to wind down the conversation here, so as folks who were listening to this want to learn a little more, both about Impact Washington and the issues that American Hort is dealing with, but also you mentioned earlier in the conversation some of the resources that American Hort has available to folks in the industry to get caught up on some of these key issues. Where can growers in this market go to for that information?
Yeah, you go to the American Heart website, go to the Advocacy, click on it, it'll come up. The first thing I'd tell you to look at is our advocacy actions. These are all the letters that we have signed with other trades, other industry folks related to if it's labor, tax, trade, tariffs, USDA, just anything up there to get engaged. And then we have our kind of top issues. And then also on the website, what we're working on. We have another link there. You can go look at the Flying Impact Washington, and then everything else related that American Hort offers, if it's education or if it's cultivate, or if it's any of the new training or any of the new certification or registrations out there. But the biggest thing is if you're interested in the advocacy side and getting more engaged and having an elected official out, we have that stuff there. If you're an American Hort member, please reach out. We have the documentations. We can walk you through that. You shouldn't be scared or frightened. Like, this is a great opportunity, as I mentioned, to tell your story. And it's kind of like a business 101. You just got to figure out what that elected official is interested in and what they want to see. And same thing with, the Flying for Impact Washington, as I mentioned earlier, it's that 30-second to 1-minute pitch. How do you get somebody interested, so that they want to say, I was on a meeting earlier today with someone was just saying, hey, I had a 5-minute meeting that turned into 45 minutes with an elected official because they were so interested and their staff kept coming in. But it's like, no, this is more important. So you never know what little button or what trigger is going to get that elected official engaged.
Yeah, yeah. Any final last minute advice for anybody who's coming in for Impact Washington?
One, rest up. Two, wear comfortable shoes. Three, as we mentioned, it could be 100 degrees or it could be 50 or 60. And four, don't worry about the small details, the little things. We will help do all that. Tell your story. Don't get into the weeds. As I'd mentioned earlier with some folks, don't be reading the one pagers that we have. Just go out and talk about it. Get that conversation. People want to know. And then, Brian, as you mentioned, a lot of your meetings are going to be with 25-year-olds because unfortunately, those are the folks that are working out here. I was one of those at one point that got into town. So the more the merrier. We love having people come out. If anybody has any questions, reach out to us. All the stuff's on the website and happy. And more importantly, thanks for doing this, Brian. Great to see you cultivating your team. And two, thanks for always pushing American Heart issues and getting our materials out.
Sure, absolutely. Anything that we can do to help. And, again, this is a great event like most of the events that American Hort does. So looking forward to it. Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.